Welcome to Heartstring Stories, where we share remarkable tales of compassion, hope, and life-changing encounters. If you believe that one moment of kindness can alter someone's destiny forever, hit that subscribe button and join our community of hopeful hearts. Today's story will show you how a simple mistake became the miracle one struggling mother desperately needed. In a weathered apartment complex on the outskirts of Portland, Olivia Reed sat cross-legged on a threadbare rug, her back pressed against a metal bed frame. The single bulb overhead cast harsh shadows across the peeling wallpaper and highlighted the dark circles under her eyes. At 24, Olivia's face still held traces of youth, but her eyes told a different story, one of sleepless nights and relentless worry. Her 6-month-old daughter, Emma, whimpered softly from the second-hand crib in the corner. The sound pierced Olivia's heart as she glanced at the kitchen counter, where a nearly empty container of baby formula sat like a ticking clock. One scoop left, maybe less, not enough to last until morning. "Shh, it's okay, sweet girl," Olivia whispered, rising to lift Emma from the crib. She cradled her daughter against her chest, breathing in her powdery scent, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. "Mommy will figure something out." Just 3 years ago, Olivia had been a promising combat medic in the army, saving lives in Afghanistan with steady hands and unwavering focus. Her unit had called her Miracle Reed for her ability to keep soldiers alive under impossible conditions. But that life ended abruptly when an IED explosion left her with a traumatic brain injury and PTSD. After months of rehabilitation, she received an honorable discharge and returned home to a country that seemed to have no place for her. Then she met Jake, a charming veteran who understood her nightmares and silent struggles. For a while, they healed together. When Olivia discovered she was pregnant, Jake promised they would build a family. "We survived war," he'd said, placing a hand on her stomach. "We can survive anything." But civilian life proved harder than combat for Jake. His PTSD worsened, and 2 months before Emma was born, he disappeared, leaving only a hastily written note. "I can't be the father she deserves. I'm sorry." Olivia's parents had died years ago, and her brother lived overseas with his own struggling family. The VA benefits helped, but they barely covered rent in the cheapest part of town. She'd been stretching formula for days, watering it down despite knowing she shouldn't, working part-time data entry jobs when her migraines allowed, but it wasn't enough. Tonight, the walls of her tiny apartment seemed to close in around her. Emma's formula was almost gone. Her next VA check was days away, and the food pantry wouldn't open until Monday. She had exactly $342 in her bank account, not even enough for a bus ride to the cheaper grocery store across town. With Emma, finally asleep against her shoulder, Olivia picked up her cracked phone. Her finger hovered over her contact list, pride battling desperation. There was Sarah, her former squad mate who had offered help months ago. Olivia had refused then, but now Emma's needs outweighed her pride. Her hands trembling, she typed, "I hate to ask, but Emma needs formula and I'm out. Can I borrow $30 until my check comes? I promise I'll pay you back." She snapped a quick photo of herself holding sleeping Emma, their faces illuminated by the phone's glow, their circumstances evident in the sparse room behind them. She hit send, then leaned back against the wall, exhaustion and shame washing over her in equal measure. But in her fatigue, her shaking fingers had tapped the wrong name in her contacts. The message hadn't gone to Sarah. Instead, it landed in the phone of Alexander Westbrook, CEO of Westbrook Technologies, one of the largest defense contractors in the country. A man Olivia had never met. A man whose number had been in her phone, only because she had once applied for a veterans program at his company and never heard back. Across the city, in a glass-walled penthouse that overlooked Portland's glittering skyline, Alexander Westbrook stared at the unexpected message on his personal phone. the sleeping baby's face illuminated on his screen, and something long dormant stirred in his chest. Alexander Westbrook stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The city of Portland spread beneath him like a sea of lights. At 42, he commanded an empire built on cutting-edge military technology and defense contracts, worth billions. His silver-streaked dark hair and tailored suit projected the image expected of a man in his position, powerful, untouchable, in control. But tonight, as rain lashed against the windows, Alexander felt none of that power. The unexpected message on his phone had caught him off guard, piercing the carefully constructed walls around his heart. The woman's tired eyes and the sleeping infant stirred memories he'd spent years burying under spreadsheets and acquisitions. "I hate to ask, but Emma needs formula and I'm out. Can I borrow $30 until my check comes? I promise I'll pay you back." He studied the photo more closely. The woman looked familiar somehow, though he couldn't place her. The apartment behind her told a story of struggle. Bare walls, a second-hand crib, a military duffel bag visible. In the corner, he scrolled through his contacts, finding her name, Olivia Reed. The name triggered a memory. Last year, his HR department had launched a veterans employment initiative at his insistence. He remembered skimming through applications, seeing her name, her impressive military record. He'd flagged her file personally, but then the company had restructured. The program was handed off to a different department, and he never followed up. Alexander's thumb hovered over the delete button. Wrong numbers happened. This wasn't his problem, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the sleeping child, so vulnerable and innocent. Or maybe it was the woman's eyes, proud despite their exhaustion, determined despite their desperation. 7 years ago, Alexander had lost his wife Claire and their unborn son in a car accident. Claire had been a military nurse who'd convinced him that his company needed to do more for veterans transitioning to civilian life. After her death, he'd thrown himself into work, turning Westbrook Technologies into a corporate giant while letting the veterans' initiatives she'd championed become mere PR talking points. He poured himself a glass of scotch, trying to silence the voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like Claire's. "This is your chance to actually help someone, Alex, not just write a check to ease your conscience." Setting down the untouched scotch, Alexander opened his banking app. He stared at the screen for a moment, then transferred $500 to Olivia Reed with no message attached. It was a meaningless amount to him, less than he'd spent on his last business dinner, but he knew it would solve her immediate problem. He assumed that would be the end of it. A small, good deed quickly forgotten. But 20 minutes later, his phone chimed with a response that made him freeze. "I think there's been a mistake. I only asked to borrow $30, not $500. I don't know who you are. I was trying to reach my friend Sarah. I can't accept this much money from a stranger." Alexander felt an unexpected smile tug at his lips. The first genuine one in months. In a world where most people would have happily accepted the money without question, this woman was refusing it on principle. He typed back, "No mistake. Consider it a delayed response to your application to our veterans program last year. Westbrook Technologies owes better to those who served." After sending the message, he pulled up her file from the company database. Olivia Reed, 24. Former Army combat medic, Purple Heart recipient, honorable discharge following injuries sustained in action. Her performance reviews described her as exceptional, with commendations from superior officers. Another message appeared. "Mr. Westbrook, the Mr. Westbrook, thank you, sir. I'll pay this back somehow." Alexander felt something stir in his chest, an unfamiliar warmth, like a machine whose gears had begun turning after years of disuse. Claire would have liked this woman, he thought. His wife had always respected people with integrity, making a decision that surprised even himself. Alexander called his driver. "James, I need you to make a stop before coming to get me." 20 minutes later, he was heading across the city toward the address listed in Olivia's file, the back seat of his car filled with bags from an all-night grocery store. Formula, diapers, baby food, and groceries that wouldn't spoil easily. He told himself this was simply fulfilling the promise his company had made to veterans. It was the right thing to do, especially since his oversight might have cost her a job opportunity. It was practical, reasonable. But deep down, Alexander knew there was something more drawing him to that rundown apartment building on the edge of the city. Something about her eyes in that photo, determined despite everything. Something about the sleeping child, innocent and unaware of the struggles surrounding her. Something about doing more than just transferring money from behind a glass wall. For the first time in 7 years, Alexander Westbrook was stepping outside the fortress he'd built around himself after Claire's death, and he had no idea what waited on the other side. Morning light filtered weakly through the thin curtains of Olivia's apartment. She moved quietly around the small kitchenette, heating water for instant coffee, while Emma slept peacefully in her crib. The $500 transfer from Alexander Westbrook still seemed surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. She'd already ordered formula for delivery and set aside the rest for rent, allowing herself to breathe a little easier for the first time in weeks. A soft knock at her door startled her. Neighbors rarely visited, and she wasn't expecting any packages until later. Cautiously, she approached the door and peered through the peephole. Her heart skipped a beat. A tall man in an expensive coat stood outside, his posture straight and commanding despite the early hour. Even through the distorted peephole view, she recognized him from news articles and magazine covers. Alexander Westbrook himself. Olivia glanced down at her worn sweatpants and faded army t-shirt, running, a hand through her untamed auburn hair. She considered pretending not to be home, but something in his expression, a strange mix of determination and uncertainty, made her unlock the door. "Mr. Westbrook?" she asked, opening the door just enough to see him clearly. Alexander hadn't planned what to say. The impulse that had driven him across the city now left him wordless as he took in the young woman before him. In person, Olivia Reed was different from her photo, smaller than he'd imagined, with intelligent green eyes that assessed him cautiously. A faint scar ran along her jawline, and she carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of someone who had served. "Miss Reed," he finally said, his voice formal despite the unusual circumstances. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I was in the area and wanted to ensure you received the funds without issue." It was a poor excuse, and they both knew it. CEOs of billion-dollar companies didn't personally follow up on mistaken text messages. "At 7 in the morning, the money came through," Olivia said, still bewildered. "But you really didn't have to—" A cry from inside the apartment interrupted her. Emma had awakened and was making her hunger known. "I should go," Alexander said, suddenly aware of the intrusion he represented. But before he could turn away, he gestured to his car where his driver stood holding several bags. "I brought some. Supplies, for the baby, and you." Olivia's eyes widened as she looked past him to the bags, more than she could carry alone. Pride warred with practicality in her expression. "I have a daughter to feed," she finally said, stepping back from the doorway. "You might as well come in while I take care of her." The apartment was small, but meticulously organized, with military precision evident in the folded blankets and neatly arranged baby supplies. Alexander stood awkwardly in the center of the main room, while his driver brought in the bags, then departed with a discreet nod. Olivia lifted Emma from the crib, murmuring soft reassurances as she settled into the only comfortable chair in the room. She mixed formula with practiced efficiency, one-handed while holding Emma. "There's instant coffee on the counter if you want some," she offered, nodding toward the kitchenette. Not up to CEO standards, I'm sure, but it's hot. Alexander poured himself a cup, oddly touched by the hospitality from someone who had so little to share. Your file said you were a combat medic, he said, leaning against the counter. Afghanistan? Olivia nodded, adjusting Emma's position as she drank eagerly from her bottle. 3 tours. The last one ended when our convoy hit an IED. She spoke matter-of-factly, without self-pity. TBI and some nerve damage, not bad enough for full disability, but enough to make civilian medical work challenging. You applied to a veterans program, Alexander said. I remember your file. What happened? A flash of disappointment crossed her face. I had a phone interview. It went well, I thought. Then nothing. I followed up twice, but never heard back. Alexander felt a pang of genuine regret. There was a reorganization. Several programs were shifted between departments. Clearly, mistakes were made. He set down his mug. I'd like to correct that, if you're still interested in employment. Emma finished her bottle, and Olivia shifted her to her shoulder, patting her back gently. Mr. Westbrook, I appreciate the gesture, but I don't need charity. If you're offering me a job out of pity because of a wrong number, your military record speaks for itself, Alexander interrupted. 3 commendations for exceptional medical care under fire. Your commanding officer called you the most level-headed medic I've ever worked with. We need people with your experience and temperament. Olivia studied him, her expression guarded but thoughtful. And what about Emma? I'm a single parent with limited support options. Westbrook Technologies has an on-site childcare facility, Alexander replied. It was my wife's initiative, actually. The mention of Claire slipped out unexpectedly, surprising him. He rarely spoke of her to anyone. Something in his tone made Olivia look at him more closely. Your wife? She passed away, he said simply, unwilling to elaborate further. Understanding flickered in Olivia's eyes, not pity, but recognition. The look of someone who knew what it meant to carry invisible wounds. I can't start immediately, she said after a moment. I'd need to arrange things for Emma, find reliable transportation. Alexander felt an unexpected sense of satisfaction. Of course, we can discuss details later. He moved toward the door, then hesitated. My driver can take you grocery shopping later, if that would help. No strings attached. Olivia's lips curved into a small, hesitant smile, the first he'd seen from her. Why are you really doing this, Mr. Westbrook? One wrong text message doesn't explain all this. Alexander considered the question, surprised to find he didn't have a practiced answer ready. Sometimes we need reminders of what matters, he finally said. Your message was mine. As he left the apartment, Alexander felt strangely lighter than when he'd arrived. The connection had been brief, unexpected, but somehow significant. For the first time in years, he'd stepped outside his carefully controlled world and found something he hadn't realized he was missing. 2 weeks after their unexpected meeting, Olivia stood in the gleaming lobby of Westbrook Technologies headquarters, Emma securely strapped to her chest in a baby carrier. The contrast between this soaring glass building and her apartment was jarring, from water-stained ceilings to a space where even the air felt expensive. Ms. Reed, welcome to Westbrook, greeted a polished receptionist. Mr. Westbrook asked to be notified when you arrived. Someone will escort you to Human Resources shortly. Olivia nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Her military uniform had once given her a sense of belonging, of purpose. In her carefully selected navy blue blazer, purchased second-hand but pressed meticulously, she felt like an imposter about to be discovered. Emma gurgled against her chest, oblivious to her mother's anxiety. Olivia stroked her daughter's fine hair, drawing strength from her warm weight. We've faced worse, haven't we, little one? She whispered. A young woman in a tailored suit approached with a warm smile. I'm Diane, Mr. Westbrook's assistant. He'd like to see you before your HR orientation, if that's all right. They entered an elevator that whisked them upward silently. Olivia's stomach lurched, not from the rapid ascent, but from the realization that this opportunity, this lifeline, had come from a misdirected text message. What if she couldn't live up to whatever Alexander Westbrook expected? The elevator opened directly into a reception area for the executive suite. Through glass walls, Olivia could see Alexander in a conference room, gesturing emphatically to a group of men and women in business attire. He looked different here, commanding, intense, fully in his element. "He's just finishing up," Diane said, leading her to a comfortable seating area. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "Water would be nice, thank you," Olivia replied, gently bouncing Emma, who'd begun to fuss. While waiting, Olivia studied the photographs lining one wall, images of Westbrook Technologies' history. One caught her eye: Alexander, looking younger and somehow lighter, standing beside a striking woman with warm eyes and a confident smile. They were cutting a ribbon in front of what appeared to be the company's childcare center. The woman must be his wife, Olivia realized. The one he'd mentioned had passed away. "That's Claire," Alexander's voice came from behind her. "She would have liked you." Olivia turned, finding him watching her with an unreadable expression. Up close, she noticed the subtle signs of exhaustion behind his professional demeanor, the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the tight set of his shoulders. "She has kind eyes," Olivia said honestly. A ghost of a smile touched Alexander's lips. "She was a military nurse. That's how we met, actually. I was visiting a VA hospital for a tech demonstration, and she told me exactly how impractical our new medical tablets were for actual field conditions." His expression softened at the memory. She never hesitated to speak truth to power. Emma chose that moment to let out a demanding cry. Olivia automatically shifted to soothe her, years of medical training kicking in as she assessed her daughter's needs. "She's not hungry, just overtired from all the stimulation," she explained, skillfully adjusting Emma's position. Alexander watched her practiced movements. "You were good at your job, weren't you?" "I still am," Olivia replied with quiet confidence. "Different circumstances now, but the skills transfer." He nodded, gesturing toward his office. "Let's talk inside." Alexander's office was surprisingly understated, functional rather than ostentatious. One wall featured military commendations and thank you letters, revealing a connection to service that Olivia hadn't expected. "Your position will be in our Veterans Health Initiatives Department," Alexander explained, taking a seat behind his desk. "We're developing new technologies for field medicine and rehabilitation. Your combat experience would be invaluable for practical applications." Olivia settled Emma on her lap, where the baby immediately began reaching for everything within grasp. "I haven't worked in medicine since my discharge," she admitted. "My hands aren't always steady, and some days the migraines make it impossible to function normally." Alexander regarded her thoughtfully. "We need your knowledge, not your physical capabilities. The job includes flexible hours and remote work options when necessary." He leaned forward slightly. "I won't pretend this isn't partly personal, Ms. Reed. Your message reminded me of promises I made, to Claire, to myself, about supporting veterans that I've allowed to become corporate window dressing." His candor surprised her. "At least you're honest about it." "I haven't been, though," he replied, unexpected vulnerability crossing his features. "Not with myself, not for years." He glanced at a photograph on his desk, turned slightly away from Olivia's view. "The accident that killed Claire happened 7 years ago. She was pregnant with our son." The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Olivia felt a surge of understanding. His interest in helping her and Emma wasn't just charity or corporate responsibility. It was connection to something he had lost. "I'm sorry," she said simply, knowing from her own losses that elaborate condolences often rang hollow. Alexander nodded once, composing himself. The point is, this position exists because it needs to exist. Your qualifications are real, but I won't pretend the timing isn't connected to that accidental message. Emma squirmed and reached toward Alexander, her tiny fingers opening and closing, in that universal baby gesture of wanting. Without thinking, Olivia stood and moved around the desk, offering Emma to him. Alexander hesitated, pain flashing across his face, but then carefully took the baby. Emma immediately grabbed his tie, examining it with intense concentration. "She likes you," Olivia observed quietly. "I haven't held a baby since—" He trailed off, his professional facade momentarily cracking to reveal the depth of his loss. Olivia saw then what connected them, not just her accidental text or his impulsive response, but something more fundamental. They were both survivors, carrying invisible wounds, both fighting to remember who they were beneath their scars. "I'll take the job, Mr. Westbrook," she said, "not out of gratitude, but because I think we might actually help each other." For the first time since she'd met him, Alexander's smile reached his eyes. 6 weeks into her new position at Westbrook Technologies, Olivia found herself settling into rhythms that had once seemed impossible. Each morning, she'd drop Emma at the company's state-of-the-art childcare center before heading to her office in the Veterans Health Initiatives Department. The work challenged her intellectually while accommodating her physical limitations, allowing her to contribute meaningfully without aggravating her injuries. Today, she sat in a development meeting reviewing prototypes for a new field trauma kit designed to be operated by soldiers with minimal medical training. Her colleagues, engineers, designers, and fellow veterans were debating the merits of different compression bandage designs. "The auto-tightening mechanism is innovative," Olivia pointed out, "but it's too complicated for someone under fire to figure out. In combat, simple is better than clever." She sketched a quick modification on her tablet. This would achieve nearly the same result with half the components and intuitive application. Jason Chen, the lead engineer, studied her drawing and nodded slowly. "She's right. We've been overthinking this." He turned to Olivia with newfound respect. "What about the hemostatic agent delivery system?" For the next hour, Olivia drew on her field experience, describing scenarios most of her colleagues had only read about in reports. When the meeting concluded, the team had a substantially redesigned prototype that would actually work in combat conditions rather than just laboratory simulations. As the room cleared, Dr. Monica Patel, the department director, touched Olivia's arm. "That was excellent work. You bring a perspective we've been missing." She smiled warmly. "Mr. Westbrook was right about you." Olivia felt a flutter of pride mingled with uncertainty. Though Alexander had been the catalyst for her employment, she'd seen little of him since starting the job. Occasionally, she'd glimpse him in the executive wing or hear his voice in conference calls, but he maintained a professional distance that left her wondering about the man who had appeared at her door with groceries and formula. After retrieving Emma from childcare, Olivia headed toward the parking garage where the company shuttle would take them home. Her apartment remained modest, but with steady income, she'd been able to add small comforts, better lighting, a proper high chair for Emma, curtains that actually kept out the morning sun. "Ms. Reed!" Olivia turned to see Diane, Alexander's assistant, hurrying toward her. "Mr. Westbrook asked if you could join him in the R&D lab. He said to bring Emma. It's not formal." Curious, Olivia followed Diane to an elevator that descended to the building's lower levels. The research and development floors were typically restricted, requiring special clearance that Olivia didn't yet have. The elevator opened into a vast space filled with workstations, prototype models, and testing equipment. Alexander stood near, a central workbench, jacket off and sleeves rolled up, examining something with intense concentration. He looked up as they approached, his serious expression softening at the sight of Emma, who was now able to sit up in her carrier and observe the world with wide-eyed curiosity. "Thank you for coming down," Alexander said, setting aside his tablet. "I wanted your opinion on something we've been developing." He led her to a workstation, where a specialized exoskeleton arm brace lay partially assembled. "This is designed for veterans with nerve damage and tremors, to stabilize fine motor control without restricting movement." Olivia shifted Emma to her hip, leaning closer to examine the device. It was lightweight, with articulated supports and sensors that appeared to map to specific muscle groups. "May I?" she asked, reaching toward it. Alexander nodded. "It's calibrated. For someone with symptoms similar to yours, actually." The implication wasn't lost on Olivia. "You developed this for me?" "Not exactly," Alexander clarified. "Your medical file helped inform the design, but it's meant for thousands of veterans struggling with similar injuries. I thought you might be willing to test the prototype, give us feedback from a user perspective." Olivia carefully transferred Emma to Alexander, who accepted the baby with growing confidence. Over the weeks, he'd gradually become more comfortable around Emma, though Olivia still caught glimpses of pain in his eyes sometimes when he held her. With both hands free, Olivia slipped on the exoskeleton brace. It was lighter than it looked, conforming to her arm with minimal adjustment. As she activated it, she felt a gentle stability flow through her fingers, not restricting her movement, but supporting it, compensating for the tremors that sometimes made delicate tasks impossible. "Try this," Alexander suggested, handing her a pen and paper with his free arm, while balancing Emma against his chest. Olivia wrote her name, then drew a simple flower, movements that normally caused frustration. As her hand betrayed her intentions, the lines flowed smoothly, precisely, following her mental commands rather than the chaotic signals her damaged nerves sometimes sent. "It works," she whispered, emotion catching in her throat. She looked up at Alexander, who was watching her, with an intensity that had nothing to do with the technology. "This could help so many people." "That's the idea," he replied, bouncing Emma gently when she began to fuss. "Your insights in the trauma kit meeting this morning convinced me you were the right person to help refine this." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "You were watching the meeting?" Alexander had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I'd review recordings of key development sessions. Your contributions have been noteworthy." A comfortable silence fell between them as Olivia continued testing the brace, performing increasingly complex movements. Emma babbled happily, reaching for Alexander's tie with determined focus. "She needs dinner soon," Olivia said, checking the time. "I should get her home." Alexander nodded, but seemed reluctant to end their interaction. "There's a small cafe in the building that stays open late for the R&D teams. If you're not in a rush, perhaps we could continue this discussion." "There, they have high chairs," he added, as if this practical consideration might make the difference. The invitation hovered between them, not quite personal, not entirely professional. Olivia recognized it as a cautious step toward something neither of them had planned. "I'd like that," she said simply. The cafe was nearly empty at this hour. They settled at a corner table, Emma happily mashing small pieces of banana in her high chair, while Olivia and Alexander continued discussing the arm brace and its potential applications. Gradually, their conversation drifted to more personal territory. Alexander spoke of Claire's work with veterans, how she'd pushed him to use Westbrook's resources for rehabilitation technology. Olivia shared stories from her deployments, the lighter moments that balanced the trauma, the bonds formed under extreme conditions. "Do you miss it?" Alexander asked. "The military, I mean." Olivia considered the question seriously. "I miss the purpose, the clarity, knowing exactly what was expected and why it mattered." She glanced at Emma, But I don't miss the cost, the constant calculations about which lives could be saved and which couldn't. Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. Business involves similar calculations, just with different stakes. Claire used to tell me I was too focused on the balance sheet and not enough on the human equation. She sounds wise, Olivia observed. She was, Alexander agreed, a sad smile touching his lips. You remind me of her sometimes, the way you cut through pretense, see what actually matters. The comparison might have felt uncomfortable, but Alexander's tone held respect rather than misplaced longing. He was seeing Olivia clearly, not as a replacement for what he'd lost. As they prepared to leave, Alexander insisted his driver take them home. Standing in the parking garage beside his sleek company car, Olivia found herself reluctant to end the evening. "Thank you for the arm brace test," she said, adjusting a sleeping Emma against her shoulder. "And for dinner. It was nice to talk about something other than diaper brands and sleep schedules." Alexander smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious features. "Thank you for your expertise and the company." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps we could make this a regular occurrence. The prototype will need ongoing adjustments based on your feedback." They both recognized the professional justification for what it was, a safe framework for a connection neither had anticipated but both increasingly valued. "I'd like that," Olivia replied. "For the project, of course." "Of course," Alexander echoed, the warmth in his eyes suggesting much more than technical collaboration. As the car pulled away from Westbrook Technologies, Olivia gazed at the illuminated building against the night sky. 6 weeks ago, she'd been a desperate mother with an empty formula can and nowhere to turn. Now she had purpose again, work that mattered, and an unexpected connection with a man who understood loss in ways few others could. One mistaken message had changed everything, not as a fairy tale rescue, but as the first step on a path. She was now walking through her own strength, her own value, her own choices. 3 months into Olivia's tenure at Westbrook Technologies, whispers began circulating through the company's sleek corridors. Weekly, prototype testing sessions with Alexander had evolved into regular dinners, sometimes with Emma, sometimes after Olivia had dropped her daughter at the company's extended hours childcare. Employees noticed their CEO's renewed energy, the occasional smile that softened his typically stern demeanor, the way he made time in his ruthlessly efficient schedule for meetings with the Veterans Health Initiatives Department. The rumors might have remained harmless office gossip if not for Marcus Davenport, Westbrook's ambitious chief operating officer. Marcus had joined the company 2 years after Claire's death, when Alexander was at his most withdrawn. He'd steadily accumulated influence during Alexander's emotional absence, positioning himself as the practical voice of reason against what he privately called Alexander's sentimental impulses, particularly regarding veterans programs that didn't directly benefit the bottom line. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Marcus cornered Alexander after a tense board meeting where Alexander had forcefully defended increased funding for the Veterans Health Initiatives Department. "A word, Alex." Marcus closed the boardroom door, his expression carefully concerned. "There's been talk about you and the new hire, Olivia Reed." Alexander continued gathering his documents, his face revealing nothing. "Is there a point to this conversation, Marcus? People are wondering if her rapid advancement is based on merit or other factors." Marcus leaned against the polished table. "The board respects you enormously, but some members are concerned about potential liabilities. An executive involved with a subordinate, particularly one he personally hired under unusual circumstances, raises governance questions." Alexander's expression hardened. "Ms. Reed's contributions to the trauma kit and exoskeleton projects have been documented and quantifiable. Her military experience provides invaluable practical insights our theoretical models missed. If anyone questions her value to this company, they're welcome to review the project data. Marcus raised his hands in a placating gesture. I'm on your side, Alex, always have been. But there's also the optics to consider. A wealthy CEO and a struggling single mother with financial problems. It doesn't look good, especially given how she came into the company. One wrong text message, and suddenly she has a cushy job. People make assumptions. What exactly are you suggesting? Alexander's voice had dropped dangerously low. Just some professional distance, for both your sakes. Marcus's concern seemed genuine, though something calculating lurked beneath. We have subsidiaries where her talents could be equally valuable. A lateral move, same salary, but without the appearance of impropriety. Alexander stood perfectly still. The only sign of his anger, the whitening of his knuckles against the leather portfolio he held. Ms. Reed reports to Dr. Patel, not to me. Her performance reviews are conducted according to standard procedures. There is nothing inappropriate about our professional relationship. The careful phrasing wasn't lost on Marcus. And outside the office is none of your concern. Alexander moved toward the door, then paused. The Veterans Health Initiatives was Claire's project. I won't have it undermined by innuendo or corporate politics. After Alexander left, Marcus remained in the boardroom, thoughtfully tapping his fingers against the polished table. Claire had been dead for 7 years, yet her influence lingered like a ghost, particularly in Alexander's irrational attachment to programs that diverted resources from more profitable ventures. Now this new woman threatened to strengthen that influence just when Marcus had been making progress, steering the company toward his vision. Perhaps it was time to learn more about Olivia Reed. Across the building in the research lab, Olivia stood, with Dr. Patel, demonstrating the latest refinements to the exoskeleton arm brace. Emma sat in her carrier nearby, contentedly chewing a teething toy, now a familiar presence during testing sessions. The micro-adjustments in the thumb stabilization make a significant difference, Olivia explained, performing a series of fine motor tasks that would have been impossible with her tremors. But we're still getting interference when the user experiences stress or pain spikes, Dr. Patel nodded, making notes. The neurological response during stress changes the tremor patterns. We might need additional sensors to compensate. Olivia began removing the prototype when her phone buzzed with a notification. A news alert from a military veterans website appeared on her screen. Westbrook Technologies announces major expansion of Veterans Health Program. Did you know about this? She asked Dr. Patel, showing her the headline. The older woman smiled. Alexander called me this morning after the board meeting. They've approved full funding for both the trauma kit and exoskeleton projects, plus expansion into prosthetics research. We're hiring 5 more veterans with medical experience. Pride and satisfaction warmed Olivia's chest. She'd been part of building something meaningful, something that would help people who had suffered as she had. For the first time since her injury, her experiences felt like an asset rather than a liability. As if summoned by their conversation, Alexander appeared at the lab entrance. His expression was tense, preoccupied, but it softened visibly when he spotted Olivia and Emma. A moment, Ms. Reed, he requested, professional but with an underlying warmth that didn't escape Dr. Patel's notice. Olivia followed him to a quiet corner of the lab, bringing Emma with her. I just heard about the board approval. Congratulations. It's your victory too, Alexander replied. Your input has been instrumental in proving these projects' viability. He hesitated, uncharacteristically, uncertain. There's something else I wanted to discuss. Are you free for dinner tonight? Without Emma, if possible. The request surprised her. Their previous meals had always included her daughter, or maintained the pretext of work discussions. I can ask my neighbor to watch her. Is everything okay? Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Just some company matters I'd like your perspective on. I'll send a car at 7 if that works for you. Though his tone remained casual, Olivia sensed an underlying tension. After nearly 4 months of working closely together, she'd learned to read the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the slight furrow between his brows that indicated concern, the controlled precision of his movements when something had unsettled him. Of course, she agreed, studying him. 7 works fine. As Alexander walked away, Dr. Patel appeared beside Olivia with a knowing expression. He's different when you're around, you know, more present. More like the man he was before the accident. Olivia felt a blush rising to her cheeks. We're colleagues, friends, maybe. Dr. Patel's eyes crinkled with gentle amusement. I've known Alexander Westbrook for 15 years, my dear. Claire was one of my closest friends. She would have approved of you, not just for the work you're doing, but for bringing him back. To himself. The comparison to Claire still unsettled Olivia. The ghost of Alexander's wife seemed to hover around the edges of their interactions, not in an unhealthy way, but as a presence neither could quite forget. I'm not trying to replace anyone, Olivia said quietly, adjusting Emma's carrier strap. On her shoulder. Of course not, Dr. Patel replied. That would be impossible. But healing doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means finding a way to carry it forward into something new. She patted Olivia's arm. Just something to consider. Later that afternoon, as Olivia prepared to leave for the day, she found a small package on her desk. Inside was a silver identification bracelet sized for a child, with Emma's name and medical information engraved on one side. A small note accompanied it. Standard issue for Westbrook's smallest consultant. The thoughtfulness of the gesture. Practical, protective, but also acknowledging Emma's place in their professional world, touched Olivia deeply. Alexander had never tried to separate her role as a mother from her contributions as an expert. Instead, he had consistently found ways to integrate them, respecting both parts of her identity. Olivia carefully fastened the bracelet around Emma's tiny wrist, her mind turning to the evening ahead. Something had shifted today, in Alexander, in their carefully maintained boundaries, perhaps in the company itself. As she gathered her things to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were approaching a crossroads neither had anticipated. When she sent that desperate text message 4 months ago, what had begun as an accidental connection had grown into something neither could easily define or dismiss. Tonight, it seemed, they would finally acknowledge what had been building between them, for better or worse. The restaurant Alexander had chosen sat perched on the 23rd floor of Portland's most exclusive hotel, its glass walls offering panoramic views of the city lights reflecting against rain-slicked streets. Olivia stepped out of the company car, grateful she had borrowed a dress from her neighbor, a simple black cocktail dress that managed to look elegant despite its second-hand origin. The driver handed her an umbrella and promised to wait, reinforcing her sense that this evening marked a departure from their usual professional interactions. The maitre d' escorted her immediately to a private dining room separated from the main restaurant by frosted glass. Alexander stood as she entered, his usual corporate armor replaced by a charcoal suit that seemed less formal, more personal somehow. "You look beautiful," he said simply, holding her chair. Olivia felt a flicker of self-consciousness. "This is quite a step up from the company cafe. I thought privacy might be valuable for our conversation." Alexander signaled the sommelier who poured 2 glasses of wine. "How's Emma? Settled with your neighbor?" "Mrs. Delgado from across the hall is watching her. They have a special relationship. Emma throws food. Mrs. Delgado pretends to be delighted." Olivia smiled fondly, then grew serious. "Alexander, what's going on? This doesn't feel like our usual dinner." He took a measured sip of wine before meeting her eyes. Marcus Davenport approached me after the board meeting today. There have been comments about our relationship. Oh, Olivia's stomach tightened. She'd noticed occasional glances from co-workers, whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, but had attributed it to her unusual hiring circumstances rather than her connection with Alexander. Professional concerns? Ostensibly. Marcus suggested your contributions might be viewed as receiving preferential evaluation due to our personal connection. Alexander's jaw tightened. He recommended creating distance, perhaps transferring you to a subsidiary. Olivia set down her glass carefully, processing the implications. And what did you tell him? That your professional contributions speak for themselves, and that our personal relationship is none of the company's concern. Alexander's direct gaze held hers, but his comments raised questions I've been avoiding about what exactly this is between us. The waiter arrived with appetizers, forcing a pause in their conversation. When they were alone again, Olivia found herself struggling to define something that had evolved naturally, without labels or expectations. We started as a mistake. A text message sent to the wrong number, she said finally. Then colleagues, then friends, and now she trailed off, uncertain how to continue. Now we're something more, Alexander finished quietly. Something I didn't expect to find again after Claire. The mention of his wife hung between them, not as a barrier, but as an acknowledgement of the past that had shaped him. Olivia had learned fragments of their story over months of conversations. Their meeting at the VA hospital, Claire's passionate advocacy for veterans, the joy they'd felt when discovering her pregnancy, and the devastating accident that had taken everything from Alexander in a single moment. I'm not Claire, Olivia said gently. I can't be. I would never want you to be, Alexander replied with unexpected fierceness. You're Olivia Reed, combat medic, survivor, brilliant innovator, devoted mother. You've created your own path through impossible circumstances. His expression softened. That's who I've come to care for. Not a replacement for someone I've lost, but someone new I never expected to find. Olivia felt tears threatening and blinked them away. After Jake had abandoned her during pregnancy, she'd walled off that vulnerable part of herself, focusing entirely on survival and Emma's well-being. Alexander had somehow slipped past those defenses, not with grand gestures, but through consistent respect, through seeing her completely, both her strengths and limitations, and valuing all of it. What happens now? She asked. I won't risk my position at Westbrook. The work we're doing matters too much. That's why I wanted to speak privately, Alexander said. I've been thinking about restructuring the Veterans Health Initiatives division as a separate foundation, still connected to Westbrook, but with independent governance. Dr. Patel would serve as executive director, reporting directly to the foundation board rather than corporate management. Your role would expand to Director of Product Development, reporting to her. Olivia studied him carefully. You're creating an entire organizational structure to avoid an HR issue. A smile touched the corner of Alexander's mouth. I'm acknowledging the strategic importance of veterans' health innovation by giving it appropriate autonomy and resources. The fact that it resolves potential conflicts of interest is a secondary benefit. And this has nothing to do with Marcus Davenport's concerns. Marcus has been pushing to scale back veterans' programs for years, considering them charitable distractions from more profitable defense contracts. Alexander's expression hardened momentarily. The foundation structure protects these initiatives from internal budget battles while establishing clear governance separation. Olivia considered the proposal, impressed by its elegance. The restructuring made legitimate business sense while addressing the personal complications. And us? Where does that leave us? Free to explore what this might become without professional entanglements. Alexander reached across the table, taking her hand. I don't want to rush you, Olivia. You've rebuilt your life under extraordinary circumstances. Emma needs stability. But I also don't want to pretend that what I feel for you is simply friendship or professional admiration. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed urgently with repeated notifications. Apologizing, she checked the screen and felt her blood run cold. 3 missed calls and multiple texts from Mrs. Delgado. Emma, burning up with fever, called pediatrician, says bring her in immediately. I have to go, Olivia said, already standing. Emma's sick, high fever. Alexander was immediately on his feet, all other concerns forgotten. My driver's waiting downstairs. We'll go directly to your apartment. The pediatrician's office has after-hours urgent care until 9, Olivia explained as they hurried toward the elevator, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Emma had been teething, fussy but not ill when she'd left, for her temperature to spike so quickly. In the car, Olivia called Mrs. Delgado for details while Alexander instructed the driver. Her neighbor's voice was strained with worry. 102.3 degrees, and she's not responding normally. Very lethargic. I gave her the children's Tylenol from your cabinet about 15 minutes ago. Olivia's medical training kicked in, cataloguing symptoms against possible causes, but her mother's heart pounded with fear. When they reached her apartment building, Alexander followed without hesitation as she raced up the stairs, too urgent to wait for the unreliable elevator. Mrs. Delgado met them at the door, relief washing over her lined face. Thank God you're here. The fever's not coming down. Emma lay listlessly on a blanket, her normally rosy cheeks flushed an alarming red, her eyes glassy and unfocused. When Olivia lifted her, the heat radiating from her tiny body sent fresh waves of panic through her. We need to get her to the doctor now, Olivia said, gathering Emma's diaper bag with shaking hands. Alexander took the bag from her. Let me. You focus on Emma. The quiet authority in his voice steadied her. This wasn't the CEO of Westbrook Technologies or her cautious friend. This was the man who had once promised to protect a family, who understood what was at stake. In the car, Olivia cradled Emma against her chest, murmuring reassurances while monitoring her pulse and breathing. Alexander sat beside them, one hand resting supportively on Olivia's back, the other holding his phone as he made rapid arrangements. I've contacted Dr. Abernathy at Portland Children's Hospital, he said quietly. She's the head of pediatric emergency medicine and an old family friend. She'll meet us there. Olivia looked up sharply. The pediatrician said to bring her to urgent care. Children's Hospital has better resources if this is serious, Alexander said firmly. Better to start there than to be transferred later if she worsens. The decisive logic cut through Olivia's panic. She nodded gratefully, recognizing that Alexander was leveraging his connections not out of high-handedness but out of genuine concern for Emma. As they sped through rain-slicked streets toward the hospital, Emma's small body burning against her chest, Olivia found herself drawing strength from Alexander's steady presence. The conversation from dinner, career implications, potential relationships, corporate politics, seemed distant and unimportant compared to the immediate crisis. Yet something fundamental had shifted between them. In this moment of fear and vulnerability, the careful boundaries they had maintained dissolved. They were no longer CEO and employee, no longer cautious friends exploring undefined possibilities. They were simply two people united in concern for a child they both cared about deeply. When Emma stirred restlessly, Alexander gently brushed her damp curls back from her forehead, his expression reflecting Olivia's own worry. The tenderness of the gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She'll be all right, he said softly. We'll make sure of it. We. The word hung between them as the car pulled up to the hospital entrance, where a medical team already waited. In the midst of crisis, Without discussion or declaration, they had become a unit, facing uncertainty together rather than apart. The pediatric emergency department at Portland Children's Hospital hummed with quiet efficiency, a world away from the chaotic military field hospitals where Olivia had once worked. Dr. Abernathy, a slim woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair, examined Emma with gentle thoroughness while explaining each step to Olivia. Her temperature is 103.1, which is concerning but not immediately dangerous, Dr. Abernathy said, listening to Emma's chest with practiced precision. Her breathing sounds good, no signs of respiratory infection. Ears look inflamed, though. Likely a severe ear infection that developed quickly. Emma whimpered weakly, reaching for Olivia with uncharacteristic lethargy. The sight of her normally vibrant daughter so subdued sent waves of helplessness through Olivia, triggering memories of wounded soldiers she couldn't save despite her best efforts. "We'll start antibiotics immediately," Dr. Abernathy continued, "and run some blood work to confirm there's no other infection. With her age and symptoms, I'm fairly confident this is an acute otitis media, painful but treatable." Alexander stood nearby, his typical commanding presence subdued but supportive. He'd made calls, expedited their intake, ensured they had a private room rather than curtained bay, all without overstepping Olivia's authority as Emma's mother. Now he listened intently to the doctor's explanation, asking focused questions that revealed more medical knowledge than Olivia had expected. "Will she need to stay overnight?" he asked. "I'd like to observe her for a few hours, make sure the fever responds to treatment and she's hydrating properly," Dr. Abernathy replied. "If all goes well, you can take her home tonight with oral antibiotics." A nurse arrived to draw blood samples and administer the first dose of medication. Emma cried, weakly, clinging to Olivia, who murmured soothing words while struggling to contain her own distress. Alexander stepped closer, resting his hand lightly on Olivia's shoulder, a silent promise of presence. When the medical team stepped out to process the samples, Olivia sagged into the chair beside Emma's bed, the adrenaline that had sustained her beginning to ebb. "She was fine this morning," she whispered, stroking Emma's feverish cheek. "How did I miss this?" "Ear infections can develop rapidly in infants," Alexander said, his voice gentle. "You didn't miss anything. You responded immediately when symptoms appeared." Olivia shook her head, irrational guilt consuming her. "I should have been there. Not at some fancy restaurant discussing corporate politics. You're allowed to have dinner, Olivia. You're a dedicated mother, not a monitoring machine." Alexander knelt beside her chair, meeting her eyes directly. "In the military, did you ever blame yourself for not preventing injuries you couldn't possibly have foreseen?" The question cut through her self-recrimination. "That's different, is it?" His gaze remained steady. "You were a combat medic who saved lives under impossible circumstances. Now you're a mother doing the same. The scale is different, but the principle isn't." His words penetrated her exhaustion and fear, offering perspective she couldn't find alone. Olivia felt tears threatening and blinked them away, unwilling to break down completely. "I can't lose her," she admitted, voicing her deepest fear. "She's everything." Alexander's expression softened with understanding. "You won't lose her. Not tonight, not to this." He hesitated, then added quietly, "And you're not alone anymore, Olivia. Whether that text message went to me or someone else, you were never meant to face all this by yourself." Emma stirred restlessly, reaching for the unfamiliar IV in her tiny arm. Olivia gently intercepted her hand, murmuring reassurances. Alexander stood and moved to the other side of the bed, carefully arranging the tangled blanket around Emma's legs. Hours passed in the quiet hospital room. The antibiotics gradually took effect, Emma's fever slowly receding as the medication fought the infection. Olivia maintained her vigil, alternating between standing at the bedside and sitting in the uncomfortable hospital chair. Alexander stepped out occasionally to make calls or bring back coffee, but never suggested leaving. Around midnight, Dr. Abernathy returned with positive news. Her fever's down to 100.2. Blood work shows no concerning infection beyond the ear, and she's responding well to fluids and antibiotics. I'm comfortable releasing her with oral medication and close follow-up. Relief washed over Olivia, the tension of hours finally easing. Thank you, Doctor, for everything. Dr. Abernathy smiled warmly. Alex and I go back many years. When he calls about a child in distress, I listen. She turned to Alexander with a knowing look. Claire would approve. You know, the comment might have seemed intrusive, but Alexander received it with a quiet nod. Yes, she would. As Dr. Abernathy prepared the discharge paperwork and prescriptions, Olivia gathered Emma's things. The baby had finally fallen into a natural sleep, her breathing deep and regular. I can have the pharmacy deliver the antibiotics to your apartment first thing tomorrow, Alexander offered, and if you're comfortable with it, I'd like to have Dr. Abernathy make a house call tomorrow to check on Emma. Olivia started to protest that it wasn't necessary, that she could manage the follow-up care herself, but exhaustion overwhelmed her usual independence. That would be helpful. Thank you. When they finally left the hospital, Emma bundled securely. In her carrier and drowsily sucking on a pacifier, the night had turned clear and cold. Stars glittered overhead in rare visibility for Portland, the rain having washed away the usual cloud cover. The drive to Olivia's apartment was quiet, both adults reluctant to disturb Emma's hard-won rest. As they pulled up to her building, Alexander spoke softly. Let me help you get her settled. Too drained to argue, Olivia nodded. Together they carried Emma and her things up to the apartment, moving with synchronized care through the darkened rooms. Olivia changed Emma into fresh pajamas, while Alexander prepared a bottle with practiced ease, having watched Olivia's routine enough times to replicate it. As Olivia settled into the worn armchair to feed Emma, Alexander moved quietly through the apartment, washing the few dishes in the sink, folding the blanket Mrs. Delgado had left askew, setting out the morning's medications in order of administration. Small tasks, practical help offered without comment or expectation. When Emma finally drifted back to sleep, Olivia carefully placed her in the crib, both adults watching her chest rise and fall with the peaceful rhythm of healing sleep. You should rest too, Alexander said, his voice low. Tonight was intense. Olivia nodded, suddenly aware of how completely drained she felt, physically, emotionally, mentally exhausted in a way she hadn't experienced since her most difficult deployments. Will you be all right if I leave? Alexander asked, studying her with concern. I can stay on the couch if you'd prefer not to be alone. The offer was made with such straightforward care that Olivia felt no awkwardness or implication in it, just genuine concern from someone who had witnessed her vulnerability and wished to provide support. I think we'll be okay, she said, though part of her wanted to accept. Your driver must be exhausted too. Alexander nodded, respecting her decision. At the door, he paused, turning back to her with uncharacteristic hesitation. Tonight wasn't how I planned our conversation to go, he said, but in some ways it clarified things for me even more clearly. He held her gaze, his expression open and direct. I care about you, Olivia, and about Emma, deeply, more than I had thought possible after Claire. Olivia felt tears threatening again, not from fear or exhaustion this time, but from the simple power of being seen and valued. I care about you too, she admitted softly, but it's complicated. Life usually is. A gentle smile touched his lips. Get some rest. I'll call in the morning to check on Emma. After he left, Olivia stood by the crib, watching Emma sleep peacefully. Her fever reduced to a slight flush across her cheeks. The night's crisis had stripped away pretenses and careful boundaries, revealing what had been developing beneath the surface for months. Alexander had seamlessly stepped into their lives tonight, not as a CEO or benefactor, but as someone who cared deeply for both of them. He'd been steady when she faltered, practical when she panicked, present when she needed support most. In the quiet of her apartment, Olivia acknowledged what she'd been reluctant to name before. They had become a family, not through any formal declaration or deliberate choice, but through the gradual accumulation of shared moments, mutual support, and genuine care. What had begun with a desperate text message sent to the wrong number had evolved into something neither could have anticipated, a connection that transcended their differences in circumstance, woven through with shared understanding of loss and the fragile, precious nature of second chances. Morning light filtered through Olivia's apartment windows, casting warm patterns across the floor where Emma sat playing with colourful stacking rings, her energy and appetite restored after 3 days of antibiotics. The ear infection that had terrified them at the hospital had responded quickly to treatment, though Olivia still watched for any sign of returning fever or discomfort. Dr. Abernathy had visited daily, her professional assessment gradually shifting from medical necessity to friendly reassurance. This morning's checkup had been her last, pronouncing Emma fully on the mend, with instructions to complete the full course of antibiotics. "She's resilient," the doctor had commented before leaving. "Takes after her mother, I suspect." Now, sitting cross-legged beside Emma on the living room floor, Olivia felt a strange sense of suspended animation. The medical crisis had passed, but its aftermath lingered in unspoken implications. Alexander had maintained a careful distance these past 3 days, present through texts, calls, and arranged care, but physically absent since that night at the hospital. His reasons were considerate, giving them space to recover, avoiding overwhelming Emma during her illness, ensuring Olivia didn't feel crowded during a vulnerable time. Yet Olivia found herself missing his steady presence, the quiet competence that had anchored her through panic and exhaustion. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it revealed Alexander, casual in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, so different from his usual corporate armor that Olivia momentarily stared. "Is this a bad time?" he asked, noting her surprise. "No, not at all. Emma's playing and I was just—" She gestured vaguely, suddenly self-conscious in her worn leggings and oversized sweater. Alexander stepped inside, carrying a canvas bag rather than his usual leather briefcase. "I brought lunch," he explained. "And something for Emma." Emma looked up at the sound of his voice, her face brightening with recognition. She abandoned her toys and crawled rapidly toward him, pulling herself up on his pant leg with determined focus. "Hello there," Alexander said, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "Feeling better, I see," Emma babbled enthusiastically, reaching for his face with curious fingers. The easy familiarity between them struck Olivia. This child who had known only her mother's consistent presence now recognized and welcomed this man who had entered their lives through pure chance. "She's missed you," Olivia admitted quietly. Alexander glanced up, something vulnerable crossing his expression. "I've missed her too. Both of you." The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Then Emma broke the tension by grabbing Alexander's collar and attempting to eat it, making both adults laugh. Lunch proved to be homemade soup and artisan bread from a local bakery, along with fresh fruit and cheese, simple comfort food rather than the elaborate restaurant fare of their interrupted dinner. Alexander had also brought a soft plush elephant for Emma, which she immediately hugged against her chest. As they ate, conversation flowed naturally, covering Emma's recovery, developments at work, and lighter topics that had nothing to do with Illness or corporate politics, the strained awareness that had characterized their last meeting had transformed into something more comfortable, as if the crucible of Emma's health crisis had burned away pretense and hesitation. "The foundation paperwork is almost complete," Alexander mentioned as they cleared the dishes together. "The board approved the restructuring unanimously. Even Marcus voted in favor, though I suspect that's because the foundation model shifts veterans programs off the main balance sheet, which he's wanted for years." Olivia loaded the dishwasher, considering the implications. "When will the transition happen?" "Next month. Dr. Patel is already interviewing additional staff." Alexander leaned against the counter, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Your role as Director of Product Development would start immediately, if you're still interested." "Of course I am," Olivia replied. "The work we're doing matters. The exoskeleton brace alone could help thousands of veterans with nerve damage." Alexander nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. He'd always respected her dedication to the work itself, not just the opportunity it represented. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, about the night at the hospital." Olivia tensed slightly, unsure where this conversation might lead. She checked on Emma, who had fallen asleep on her playmat, the new elephant clutched in one arm. "That night clarified something for me," Alexander continued, his voice thoughtful. "When Claire died, I shut down completely. I functioned at work, expanded the company, appeared successful by every external measure, but I wasn't living, just existing." He moved to the window, gazing out at the modest view of neighboring buildings. "The accident took more than Claire and our unborn son. It took my capacity to care deeply about anything or anyone. I ran Westbrook like a machine because I'd become one myself." Olivia remained silent, recognizing how difficult these admissions were for a man who rarely spoke of his emotional life. "Then you sent that text message," he continued, turning back to face her. "A complete accident that somehow broke through defenses I thought were impenetrable. At first, I told myself I was just helping a veteran in need, fulfilling a corporate responsibility, honoring Claire's memory. But it was more than that from the beginning." He moved closer, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. "At the hospital, watching you with Emma, I realized I wasn't just concerned about a colleague's child. I was terrified for a little girl I've come to love. And I wasn't just supporting a friend through crisis. I was standing beside the woman who had somehow brought me back to life." Olivia felt her heart beating faster, emotions she'd kept carefully controlled rising to the surface. "Alexander, please let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for anything, Olivia. I know your priority is Emma, as it should be. I know your career and independence matter deeply to you. I respect all of that." His eyes held hers steadily. "I just want you to know that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here. Not as your employer or benefactor or even just a friend, but as someone who loves you both and wants to build something real with you." The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. No grand gestures, no pressure, just truth offered with quiet dignity. Olivia felt tears gathering in her eyes, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a desperate mother with an empty formula, a GAN and nowhere to turn. A mistaken text message had changed everything, not through fairy tale rescue, but through a connection that had allowed her to rebuild her life on her own terms, with support rather than dependency. "I've been afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not of you, but of what you represent, of letting someone matter to us that much, of trusting that you won't disappear like Jake did when things get difficult." Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Fear makes sense after what you've experienced. I can't promise life won't be complicated or difficult, but I can promise I won't walk away from it." Emma stirred on her playmat, making soft noises as she transitioned between sleep cycles. Both adults glanced toward her, their shared concern creating an invisible bond between them. "I don't need an answer today," Alexander said. "Or next week. Or next month. This isn't an offer with an expiration date." Olivia stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of grey in his blue eyes, the fine lines etched by grief and responsibility. "What if my answer is that I need time, but I don't want to lose what we've found?" A smile touched the corners of his mouth, relief and hope mingling in his expression. "Then we take it day by day. We build trust gradually. We see where this leads without rushing or forcing anything." Olivia nodded, something tight in her chest finally easing. "I'd like that." Alexander reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch carrying the weight of promise. "We have time," he said softly. "That's the gift we've both been given." Emma chose that moment to wake fully, announcing her presence with insistent babbling that demanded attention. Olivia moved to lift her daughter, but Alexander was already there, scooping Emma up with practiced ease. "Hello again, little one," he said, settling her against his shoulder. "Had a good nap?" Watching them together, this powerful man who commanded a corporate empire now completely focused on a babbling infant, Olivia felt something shift inside her. The walls she'd built after Jake's abandonment didn't come crashing down in a single dramatic moment. Instead, they gently began to dissolve, making space for something new to grow in their place. What had begun with a desperate text message was evolving into something neither could have anticipated. Not a rescue story, but a journey of mutual healing, of strength found in vulnerability, of family created through choice rather than obligation. Alexander looked up, catching her watching them. The smile they shared held no pressure, no demands, no expectations, just quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them and the future that might now be possible. Artifact type, text, markdown, id, story part 10, title, poor. Girl accidentally sends baby photo to CEO's phone, part 10. 18 months later, Olivia stood on the outdoor terrace of Westbrook Technologies, watching as Emma toddled energetically across the grass, chasing bubbles blown by Alexander. At nearly 2.5, Emma had blossomed into a spirited, curious child with her mother's determined green eyes and an infectious laugh that could dissolve even the most serious executive meeting. The Veterans Health Foundation, now housed in its own building adjacent to Westbrook's main campus, had exceeded even Alexander's ambitious projections. Under Dr. Patel's leadership and Olivia's product development guidance, they'd successfully launched both the trauma kit and exoskeleton brace, with 3 additional projects moving rapidly through development phases. Olivia's role had evolved. As well, her insights into veterans' needs and practical field applications had proven so valuable that she now regularly testified before congressional committees on military medical technology, advocating for improved care systems and rehabilitation options. The tremors in her hands remained, but the latest version of the exoskeleton brace, refined through her own daily testing, allowed her to perform demonstrations with precision that impressed even skeptical Pentagon officials. "Mama, look," Emma called, pointing skyward where a butterfly fluttered past. Her vocabulary had exploded in recent months, each new word a celebration. "I see it, sweetheart," Olivia called back, smiling as Alexander pretended the butterfly had landed on his head, making Emma dissolve into giggles. Today marked the official opening of the Claire Westbrook Memorial Childcare Center at the Veterans Health Foundation, an expanded facility designed specifically for employees with children, including dedicated spaces for children with special needs and flexible scheduling for parents with service-related medical appointments. The journey to this day hadn't been straight or simple. True to his word, Alexander had given Olivia the time and space she needed, never pressuring her to define their relationship before she was ready. They had moved forward carefully, building trust through shared experiences, both challenging and joyful. 6 months after Emma's hospitalization, Olivia had finally agreed to a formal date. Dinner at a quiet restaurant outside Portland, where they wouldn't be recognized as CEO and employee. 3 months after that, Alexander had met her brother's family during their visit from overseas, accepting their protective scrutiny with patient good humor. Small steps, each taken with thoughtful intention. Their first real argument had come over Olivia's insistence on maintaining her modest apartment, even after they began spending most evenings together. Alexander had offered his penthouse, then suggested buying her a house, missing the point entirely until she finally made him understand. Her independence wasn't a rejection of him, but a hard-won foundation she needed to preserve. "I don't want to be a charity case or a rescued damsel," she'd explained, her voice firm despite the tears threatening. "What we're building has to be between equals, even if our bank accounts never will be." Understanding had dawned in his eyes then, followed by genuine respect. The next day, he'd arrived with architectural plans for a separate apartment within his penthouse, a space that would be entirely hers, paid for with her own salary, a sanctuary she could retreat to whenever she needed it. The compromise had marked a turning point in their relationship, acknowledgement that love didn't require the erasure of boundaries. The true partnership meant supporting each other's needs rather than imposing a single vision of togetherness. Emma had adapted to these changes with remarkable resilience, accepting Alexander's growing presence in their lives with the straightforward openness of a child who felt genuinely loved and secure. Her first word after Mama hadn't been Dada, but Lex, her toddler approximation of Alexander's name that had brought unexpected tears to his eyes the first time she'd said it. Now, watching them together on the sunlit lawn, Olivia fingered the simple silver ring on her left hand. Alexander's proposal had come not with elaborate fanfare, but during a quiet evening at home, Emma already asleep, the three of them now a family in all the ways that mattered. "Ms. Reed," a young woman approached hesitantly, interrupting Olivia's reflections. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to thank you personally." Olivia turned, recognizing the woman as a recent hire, a former army nurse with a prosthetic leg partially concealed beneath tailored pants. "Rebecca Williams, right? From the prosthetics team." The woman nodded, clearly pleased to be remembered. "Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to say, the childcare center you helped design has changed everything for me. Being able to have my son nearby, the flexible scheduling around my physical therapy." She paused, emotion evident in her voice. "I didn't think I could be both a mother and continue my career after my injury. You've shown it's possible." Olivia felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest, the satisfaction of creating genuine impact, of transforming her own struggles into solutions for others. "The credit belongs to many people, not just me. But you were the catalyst," Rebecca insisted. "Everyone knows the story, how you accidentally texted the CEO and it changed everything, not just for you, but for hundreds of veterans now employed across the Foundation's programs." She smiled. "It gives people hope that sometimes one moment can change everything." After Rebecca left, Olivia remained on the terrace, contemplating how thoroughly that single mistaken text message had transformed not only her life, but the lives of countless others. The ripples had extended far beyond her personal journey, creating institutional change that would continue long after any individual story faded. Alexander approached, carrying a tired Emma, who had finally exhausted herself chasing bubbles. He passed their daughter to Olivia, the exchange practiced and comfortable after months of co-parenting. "Ready for the ribbon cutting?" he asked, brushing a kiss against Olivia's temple. "The press is gathering." Olivia nodded, settling Emma on her hip, almost. "Just thinking about how we got here." Alexander's expression softened with understanding. "From an empty formula can to all this. Quite a journey. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my fingers hadn't slipped that night. If I'd texted Sarah instead of you." Olivia shook her head, still amazed by the chain of events a single mistake had triggered. "I like to think we would have found each other anyway," Alexander replied, the certainty in his voice warming her. "Some connections are meant to happen, even if the path isn't straightforward." Emma patted Olivia's cheek, demanding attention in the way of toddlers everywhere. "Mama, bubbles more later." "Yes, sweetheart, after the ceremony." Olivia kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the clean scent of her hair. As they walked toward the waiting crowd, Olivia reflected on the true lesson of their story. It wasn't about rescue or chance or fairy tale endings. It was about how a single moment of connection, even one born from desperation and mistake, could open doors to possibilities previously unimagined. About how healing happened not through grand gestures, but through consistent presence, through being seen and valued for exactly who you are. The ribbon cutting was brief but meaningful, Alexander keeping his remarks focused on the veterans and families who would benefit from the center. Afterwards, as Emma charmed reporters with her antics and Dr. Patel guided visitors through the facility, Alexander found Olivia standing slightly apart from the crowd. "Happy?" he asked simply. Olivia looked around at the world they had built together, not just the physical buildings, but the community of support, the culture of respect, the family they had forged through choice rather than circumstance. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. That evening, after Emma was asleep in her room at the penthouse, Olivia and Alexander sat on the balcony overlooking Portland's glittering skyline. The same view that had once symbolized Alexander's isolation now served as backdrop to their shared life. "I received an interesting proposal today," Olivia said, curling her legs beneath her on the outdoor sofa. "The Pentagon wants to implement our trauma kit as standard issue across all branches. They're requesting modifications for different combat environments." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "That would save thousands of lives. It would also mean traveling to Washington regularly, meeting with military officials." She studied his expression. "Are you okay with that? The schedule changes, the childcare complications?" His laugh was genuine and warm. "Olivia Reed, when have you ever needed my permission to change the world?" She smiled, leaning against his shoulder as the night air cooled around them. Not permission, partnership. Alexander wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. Always, in everything. Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the night sky, gone in an instant, but leaving wonder in its wake. Like a desperate text message sent in darkness, reaching the one person who would answer not just with resources, but with heart. Some might call it luck or coincidence. Others might see divine intervention or fate. But Olivia and Alexander recognized it as something both simpler and more profound, a reminder that in our most vulnerable moments, connection becomes possible in ways we could never plan or predict. That sometimes the wrong number turns out to be exactly the right one. What began with a plea for baby formula had transformed into something neither could have imagined that night. Not just a family united, but a mission shared, a purpose discovered, a community created. The true miracle wasn't that Alexander had responded to her message, but that they had both been brave enough to continue responding day after day to the deeper messages beneath. "I see you. I value you. I choose you." And in a world that often feels disconnected and cold, that might be the greatest miracle of all. If this story touched your heart, remember that connections like these happen every day, often in ways we don't immediately recognize. A wrong number, a chance encounter, an unexpected message. These small moments can change everything when we respond with openness rather than fear. At Heartstring Stories, we believe these connections aren't just coincidences, but opportunities. They're gateways to the lives we're meant to live and the people we're meant to become. Hit that subscribe button to join our community and share your own stories of unexpected connections in the comments below. Because sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin with a single mistake and the courage to see where it might lead. Until next time, keep your hearts open to the messages the universe sends your way. You never know which wrong number might turn out to be exactly right.